Do you want to be stupid? What happens when you're stupid? You walk into walls because you don't see them. And if someone comes along who's more educated than you, more literate and cannier, you'll lose, man. You'll lose. And you'll lose too because you can't think properly. It helps you become who you could be. It helps you move out into the world and have your great adventure and to bring people along. God only knows what you can do if you've got your words lined up properly. Most of my clients, they doubled or tripled their salaries within 3 or 4 years. They worked at it. This wasn't nothing. This was major league strategic planning. And that was true for women and men. Temperamentally, I was disinclined to enjoy school, especially from grade 7 through grade 12. It was too slow for me. You know, like when I took language arts in grade 8, I had read the whole year's books in the first, I think it was the first day, but it was certainly the first week. I was just bored to death. So that wasn't so good. One of the things young men aren't taught properly, and I mean even at the age of, let's say 11, young, is like, there is nothing that will make you more powerful than your words. And so if you think that reading and writing is for pansies and dimwits, you know, or teachers' pets, because they get in less trouble in school, let's say, you're seriously misinformed. You know, I talk to people like Jocko Willink, and Jocko's as tough a guy as you could ever hope to encounter about literacy, and a number of other people too who are also seriously tough guys. They all know perfectly well that literacy is a huge part of what's made them unstoppable. And you don't take that lightly. You know, it's really serious. And it's a failing of our education system that that literacy isn't marketed properly to young men. It's like, straighten up, speak properly, write, learn to write. Why? Because that's the same as learning to think. And why should you think? Well, because you won't do as many stupid things and your horizons will widen. And then too, when you need to entice people along, your journey, hopefully somewhere good, you'll be able to do it because you'll be compelling. And there's something deeply pathological about the way our society markets literacy to young men in particular, because, well, partly we just won't allow for let's say the marketing association between toughness and dangerousness and literacy. There's something wrong about that, we think, some weird way, and that's wrong. It's like, sure, you should be physically tough and you should be tough in your temperament, as well as having the capacity for play and compassion. You know, that has to be developed too. But that's not enough. And I don't care how tough you are physically, you're nowhere near as tough as you would be if you were physically tough and really literate. And then you're an unstoppable force, and hopefully for good. And that's a much tougher battle than, you know, being tough for your own idiotic, selfish ends. That's just pathetic. Get your words together and then see what you can do. And don't be thinking that that's somehow beneath you. That just means you're stupid that you think that. You don't know anything. You think that. It's wrong. And you're limiting yourself so much you can't even imagine it. You might not even figure it out till you're 60 and then it's too late. So read, write, think. And I also think that our schools, led by the faculties of education at universities, which is an enterprise that's become corrupted almost beyond belief, we should make much more of an effort to ensure that kids are unbelievably proficient readers. And a lot of that is going to involve early automatization of letter and phoneme and syllable and word recognition. So, because what happens is, when you teach a child to read, first of all, you teach them the alphabet and the sounds. And we have an alphabetic language, thank God, because it makes things much simpler. And so you teach them the letters and then the 2-letter combinations and then the 3-letter combinations. Then they can sound out syllables and then they get words. But it isn't until you can read phrases automatically at a glance that you can read for content and pleasure. And so a lot of kids get stuck, especially if they don't come from particularly literate homes where all of this is sort of taught, you know, maybe starting at 12 months when they're first dragging a book around and becoming familiar with the book as an object, right, before they even learn to read. You got to get kids through that automatization phase, and that requires intense mass practice. And that's not that intrinsically interesting, right? But if you can get them to the point where they can read for content, well, then it starts to become interesting, just as interesting, let's say, as going to a movie or perhaps playing a video game. And so that has to be made an absolute priority. And if the faculties of education were doing their job, they would have produced technology to solve that problem for virtually every child, because it is only a matter of practice. Smarter kids will learn faster, but with enough practice, pretty much everybody is going to get there. So, and then there's the marketing issue. It's like, well, why should you read? Well, do you want to be stupid? Do you want to be stupid? What happens when you're stupid? You walk into walls because you don't see them. And if someone comes along who's more educated than you, more literate and cannier, you'll lose, man. You'll lose. And you'll lose too because you can't think properly. So you won't aim at the right things, and you won't be informed by the great individuals of the past. And you need that. We're historical creatures. This isn't optional. So why be literate? Because it helps you become who you could be. It helps you move out into the world and have your great adventure and to bring people along. God only knows what you can do if you've got your words lined up properly. And young men would listen to that if someone who knew what they were talking about was telling them that. So when we look into the past and we see our evil uncles, it's just a complete bloody catastrophic mess, isn't it? Slavery and genocide and war and oppression and that's on all of us, isn't it? And it's always lurking there in the background. And so is that male power? Well, yes, in some ways. I mean, if you don't give a man a sword, he can't use a sword, right? So not giving him a sword is one way of making sure he's peaceful, but it's not the optimal way. And besides, if you cripple men, they become far more dangerous. They become dangerous in an terrible underground fashion. Of course, the same is exactly true if you cripple women, but we're speaking particularly of boys, because I suppose there's an education crisis among boys and young men. Well, you want to encourage that power because it's actually a tremendous force for good if it's brought under control. And so, but that's a hard thing to get right. And it also requires a lot of trust and work on the part of women because they want to, it's like Beauty and the Beast, right? Because Beauty entices that beast who's real, but uncivilized and dangerous. She sort of entices him into becoming fully developed. And that's what a woman has to do when she, has that work project that she marries or has a long-term relationship with. Because if a man happens to be high in agreeableness, this is also true of women, they're much more conflict averse and they're nicer in their temperament. So if you get an agreeable boy, let's say, who also has a doting mother, then you might have that problem. There's other ways of having that problem, but that's one way. Well, when I saw people like that in therapy, they were often resentful and angry and passive aggressive. And getting in their own way, often to spite, whoever was doting on them, let's say. And so the first thing I would do is listen to why they were there, and then start to unpack that anger, and then start to work with the individual to figure out how to voice that. You have to separate out what's old history and useless, and what's just narcissism and infantilism from genuine concerns. But if you listen to people, they will sort that out for themselves. That's one of the cool things about being a therapist, is if you listen, that happens more or less by itself. And then as a behavioral psychologist, maybe someone like that would need a raise, but would be afraid to ask their boss. Well, we just practice that. It's like, okay, well, first of all, why should your boss give you a raise? There might be good reasons. He doesn't want to lose you because you're a good worker. Well, are you a good worker? And if you weren't, well, we'd solve that problem. Put yourself in a position where you deserve the raise. Well, how do you actually ask your boss for a raise? Well, you tell the truth. That's the best way. You say, look, here's what I'm doing. Here's why it's really useful for you. It looks like I'm somewhat underpaid in this role. That's demotivating me, possibly. I also have other options. I think I need, 15% more, and I'm interested in moving up, and here's what I'll do for you if you do that. And so, think about it. And then if your boss doesn't do that and all that's true, well, then you should be assertive enough to find another job. Or maybe you look for another job before you even ask for the raise. Put your CV together, right? Update it so you're not afraid to look for another job. All this is strategic thinking. That was another thing that was really fun about clinical work. Most of my clients, they doubled or tripled their salaries within 3 or 4 years. They worked at it. This wasn't nothing. This was major league strategic planning. And that was true for women and men. Think clearly about it, right? And get your act together. You know, and you got to see what's getting in your way. So maybe you're afraid to ask your boss for a raise because if he says no, you'd have to look for a job and you don't have your resume or CV updated. And the reason you don't have it updated is because you're embarrassed about the lacks in it. And you don't want to face the lacks because then you'd have to see how you didn't get educated properly because you were useless, and you'd have to take steps to rectify that. And like, it's a real mess down there, right? Yeah. The reasons you're not asking. So we'd lay that all out and then say, well, you're embarrassed about your resume. Well, update it and let's take a look at it. Okay, well, here's some holes and they're not good. What could you do to fix those? And then you break it down into small steps, right? Implementable steps, because that's very practical. So that's a good thing to know. If you have your sights set on a goal, you'll move towards it if you break the steps down small enough so that even someone as useless as you will do it. And that also requires a fair bit of humility, because what you might find, especially if you're avoiding something, is that the step you are actually willing to take is so small that you're embarrassed to admit it to yourself, so you won't take any steps at all. Well, that's completely counterproductive. And the reason that's not proper thinking, let's say, or productive thinking, is that while small steps get bigger real fast, it doesn't matter where you start. If you're doubling your utility every few weeks, who cares where you start? It starts to take off real quick. You don't want to be so embarrassed by where you are that it stops you from becoming who you could be. And that's tough. It can be that's real tough. I'm not making light of that. I see exactly why people avoid, but it's not a good solution.